You seem to be doing better this week, the therapist told her, smiling professionally. Did something change by any chance? Everything, actually. I have a lot to tell you, she said, with a smile he had not seen on her before, or possibly on anyone he could remember. As you know, it all started at the cemetery where I used to work. She trailed off, seemingly deliberately giving him a chance to intervene. Used to? He inevitably asked. Yes, she confirmed. I quit at the start of this week. Don't you need that job? Do you have someone who can help you find another one? Oh, I appreciate your concern, doctor, but I really never needed the money, she told him, and the smile simultaneously lit up and darkened the atmosphere. Now, as I was saying, it all started at the cemetery. Without her realizing it, she's been steadily collecting them over the years, the scores of spirits drifting in and out of that cemetery. She'd worked the graveyard shift for years as a security guard, but only had the job in the first place thanks to her boyfriend, that oh-so-wonderful boyfriend who was endlessly patient with her, though clearly as bored as could be. It was perhaps because of the spirits in question that she seemed to be, for the better half of a decade, unable to really make any decisions of her own. There always seemed to be multiple different voices in her head arguing about what the right thing was to do in any given situation. Most of the time she ended up not making any, whether relying on someone else to decide or just doing nothing altogether. She had chalked it up to different aspects of her personality, assuming that they were just conflicting parts of herself that couldn't always agree on one thing. She had no suspicions that she was being possessed. Who in their right mind would? It really wasn't until very recently that the realization came to her, because it wasn't until very recently that the spirits in question had done any real or genuine damage to her day-to-day life. Whether the sudden and drastic shift was due to a new, louder and bolder spirit joining the ranks and encouraging the rest to also be louder and bolder, or whether the change was the end result of a gradual building up of tensions from already existing and hitherto mostly quiet spirits, culminating in an inevitable outburst, was unsure. Regardless, the outcome was the same. A sudden and violent mental breakdown, with the usual arguing voices now all screaming at one another, each as loudly as the other. She had been sent to therapy immediately, her oh-so-wonderful boyfriend insisting that he would have no such behavior under his roof. His expensive, luxurious roof. He especially would not have it in or on the imported sheets, the delicate Egyptian cotton, he insisted, and she felt her head spin with shame and self-loathing. The therapist in question had been very patient with her. He had noticed immediately that the most likely cause of her mental breakdown had been her failing relationship, had refused to even consider the possibility that she might genuinely be possessed, insisted gently but firmly that this was all in her head. So she resolved, after much arguing with the voices, that her best course of action would be to use the therapy as an outlet, even if she knew the doctor would never believe the truth. Spirits or none, her relationship was on the rocks. She knew it was all her fault. She knew it and could do nothing but sit back and watch things burn, and know in her heart that no one else would ever do as much, treat her as well, be as good to her. She knew it and she hated that there was no more that she could do. At least, not after everything she had already done, including but not limited to essentially sacrificing every aspect of herself and becoming meek and feeble in the process. She had nothing left to offer, no decisions left to make other than to watch it all fall apart. That is, until she met Janet, her now best friend, the latest spirit in her collection. Janet maintained, nay, insisted, that she could turn everything around, turn her whole life around. All she needed to do was give her permission. Permission for what? She asked, a little bit frightened. For everything, Janet replied. From deciding how to handle this to getting rid of the other spirits. You can do that, of course, but only with your permission, she said. The girl took a deep breath, feeling her hands shake a little, and said yes. And just like that, everything did turn around. The only really scary thing that happened was the momentary screaming, louder and suddenly terrified, followed by a natural silence. It had never been spoken, but they both knew that Janet had effectively massacred each and every single one of her unwanted spirits. That was not the scary part. The scary part was that she found that not only did she not care, but as events unfolded, she began to admire Janet to an alarming extent. She wanted to be her. The oh-so-wonderful boyfriend, she had found out later that evening, had been on the verge of leaving her. Not for another woman, just because. Her initial reaction was the usual, blaming herself, crying in bed all day and feeling terrible and unable to decide whether to try and win him back or just let him be happy without her. That was until Janet intervened and went with her through past events to help her make up her mind, once and for all, about what to actually do in this situation. "What do you mean?" she asked the woman living in her head, still sobbing. "I mean, dear, that you need to take decisive action. There are only two options in this situation: fight for him or kick him to the curb. The outcome will depend entirely on whether or not he's worth it," she concluded. Of course, she had immediately insisted that he was, in fact, worth it. But then, Janet had anticipated that she would. It was why she needed her to really dig deep through her memories, think hard about what her relationship was actually like, what kind of man this really was, in order to decide. In the end, it didn't take her very long to make the realization herself, although it had felt like the memories playing out had taken hours, days almost. But truthfully, within a few minutes, it finally dawned upon the girl that, like it or not, things had not gone well in her relationship, ever. It occurred to her that her therapist had seemingly not picked up on any of the things she told him, had not noticed the subtle hints she was dropping, even if only subconsciously, that her boyfriend had in fact been abusive. Of course, Janet was fully aware of all this the whole time, and had held back on saying this to her. She knew that it was something the girl needed to realize on her own, but the more she tried to tell her herself, the more she would refuse to listen and only defend her oh-so-wonderful boyfriend. But she had made the connection herself, had come to the conclusion on her own. She had been apt to second-guess herself, but the evidence was too staggering in this case for it to be possible. Once she had made the realization, there was something that changed. In her own character, she felt a small tectonic shift, and she knew that the tiny alteration would never be repaired. It was as though her and Janet came closer than ever before, close enough to stand in the same space and breathe in the same air and almost be the same person. It had only happened for an instant, but that instant was enough for their minds to merge, just for a moment, and for the aftermath to be instantly permanent on her own psyche. It was the second time she had encountered the dark nature within Janet, had realized that she was in fact dangerous. Clearly the woman had sinister intentions, and the moment their personalities collided, she knew that she preferred it that way. She would trust this insane woman with her life, although she couldn't explain or understand why. Suddenly and unexpectedly, she spoke to Janet. "I want him to pay. Help me do that," she said. "I didn't expect that from you, of all people. Aren't you always a good girl?" she asked, somewhat mockingly. "I'm tired of being a good girl, and this is where it got me. Humiliated, sent to a therapist for a disorder I don't have, and before long, dumped." "Then what will you do?" Janet asked. "I don't know," she sighed. "I'm not exactly an expert at this. That's why I want you to help me," she pleaded. "And who says I am the expert?" Janet asked, feigning innocence. "Even I can tell that you most certainly are. Don't get me wrong. I like that about you. I admire you," she said. "Then let's make a deal," Janet whispered excitedly and a bit aggressively. Thank you for listening and watching. All links and references are in the description below.